I'm told I get to answer questions. Have at me.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to have the cordless mic, so just raise your hand and I'll walk around. Also, if you were just as inspired by that presentation as I was, please use the hashtag FHBreakfast17.
And tweet like maniacs.
Anybody have a question?
Sorry. Hi. So I work in Flint, Michigan, and the Michigan Civil Rights Commission just released a kind of ruling / packet of information about how historic ingrained racism in Flint did lead to and affect and cause the Flint water crisis, and that includes things like redlining, which is very interesting to hear you say that that is still happening today. What are things that we can do to prevent something like that from happening again? And again, not expecting you to solve the Flint water crisis, but just
Thank you.
What can we all be doing to prevent that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There are civil rights people working on the Flint situation in various ways, because what you're talking about is an entire community that has been so disinvested over the years that people did not take care of the environmental problems, did not take care of the transportation problems, did not take care of other problems. So that the combination of segregation, and often associated with redlining, and then exclusion, and then ignoring them, is a pattern, unfortunately, that's replicated all over the country. So the question is, what do you do about that? Well, I don't know. Do you look down to the next town down the road, right, which has significant patterns of segregation, and do you start thinking about how to rebuild that community instead of ignoring it? I mean, that is a big part of this whole initiative that HUD is working on called Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing. What you end up doing is you take patterns that are segregated by race and often very, very poor. And instead of thinking more housing, they're putting, as Richard Rothstein says, gilding the ghetto by making it look a little nicer. You invest in that community. You put commercial or retail. It's down on the river. You know, you do retail development, not losing housing while you do it necessarily, but invest for the grocery stores, for the infrastructure, the sidewalks and the street lights, for the environmental remediation that sometimes is needed. So you invest in those communities and simultaneously provide opportunities for people who want to move out of the neighborhood to do so without forcing them, without unlawfully displacing them, right? So the balance is invest in poor communities of color, do environmental remediation, fix the sidewalk, fix the street lights. You know, one of the things that just drives me crazy, people always talk about the high crime levels in communities of color, and then I go into every single one of them, they don't have street lights. Why do they think there's crime in those communities? They don't have good street lights in many situations. They don't have a police presence. You know, instead of casting aspersions based on perceived characteristics of the residents, you make a plan, a neighborhood development plan for different parts of the neighborhood to invest, to strengthen, and at the same time to provide choices. That's a gross oversimplification, but it is, as best I can do, when I've already talked as long as I have. Happy to talk to you individually. Community development block grant people in the room? Yes? Oh, hi, y'all. Good. So there are often neighborhood plans going on, not just here, but in Ypsilanti and other parts of the community about how to address that consistent with fair housing principles. Often the first thing is the most immediate. I've seen public and assisted housing to be lead infested, for example, which poses a definite and direct health risk to every kid under the age of 6 who lives there. The water pollution stuff in Flint is just huge. And, you know, it has been allowed to get to the situation where it's very difficult to control it. You try to look at those problems before they become such a big problem and identify them and begin remediating them before they get to the point where they are killing people. Other questions? There's a lady down here. Oh, lady back there first.
Hello.
Hello.
I wanted to ask what your perception of, or what the mood is around the fact that Ben Carson has taken leadership of HUD, and how you predict that that will impact the status of fair housing.
So that's a great question. Look, it's okay. It's okay. So here's what I said at the table during breakfast. So far, I have seen no changes, no significant changes at HUD itself in its day-to-day operations. There are concerns, especially in a budget that zeroes out CDBG, which is all of the money that funds you guys in your programs. And that benefits, I mean, the Community Development Block Grant Program, 70% at least of those funds have to be used to benefit low and moderate income people. That is the major tool in our country today to really invest in communities that are poor, and especially communities of color. So zeroing, and perhaps that's why it's targeted, I couldn't say. But there were cuts to the CDBG program a few years ago, established by Congress, and CDBG bounced back because the mayors and the elected officials came in and raised, and the state officials, not just the mayors, came in and raised holy heck with Congress. So I imagine that they will come back and make those arguments again. As far as Ben Carson himself, the leadership that I work with is taking the hopeful road, the higher, they go low, we go high. They're going high. They're talking to him sort of with the best point of view and saying that fair housing does things and supports things and projects that are important to Ben Carson and the people he represents, and here's some examples. So I think it's a little too early to tell. Day-to-day operations at HUD remain pretty much the same, and I see that in the enforcement work I do and in the policy work I do, and because somebody would call me if things had gotten really badly out of whack, because they would have. So I haven't heard of any of that yet. With Ben Carson, the fear is that he was put in place to dismantle HUD, to cut some programs, privatize other programs, and send fair housing enforcement to the dungeon or to the Department of Justice or somewhere. The advocates are aware of those concerns. There is a huge mass. There are frequent phone calls about how to strategize on policy levels and advocacy points at the national level, especially to preserve the affirmatively furthering fair housing mission and to preserve fair housing enforcement. And so I think you can participate at the local level through PAM or through the Michigan Department or wherever to support that. But it's harder. I mean, I know all these executive orders makes it seem like there's a lot of change going on, but the problem is that the change that apparently is desired is not being upheld by the courts. And so there are also people who will challenge various actions that are changed too quickly and without adequate thought from Washington. There will be people who will file lawsuits. And my firm is filing more lawsuits today already around issues to try to get them solidified in court decisions as opposed to policy issues that a new administration might change. But the truth is, keep our eye on the ball. It's your community. Work in your community. And then build in your community the kind of model and the kind of example that can inform and others who are looking for ways to change their worlds. That's a long answer. But I didn't want to say, just forget about HUD. I don't think you should forget about HUD. It's a big institution. There's a lot of programs. There are a lot of people who are supported by it. And there are a lot of poor people who this administration has no idea what to do about if, in fact, they cut the programs. And once, it's like a lot of things, it's unintended consequences. And unintended consequences can challenge decision makers and policy makers at all kinds of levels. Why, before you act, you got to think about all the things. You can't just say, let's go do this. What the heck? No good business person does that. No good leader does that. Look at everything from every angle and think about how to deal with things in multiple dimensions and using the fewest resources possible, but to accomplish what's needed to be accomplished. What else?
I'm going to try to answer this question, and I don't know if I have all of the facts correctly, but our daughter and her spouse, it's the same-sex marriage, was looking at buying a home in Philadelphia, and they had contracted, the lender was USAA. And my daughter has a large student loan. So they went through all of the paperwork and they were assured that they were going to get the loan, but when the lender and the underwriter looked at the percentage of her student loan, they denied the loan, but they didn't use the right justification, I guess, for denying the loan. According to Freddie Mae, I guess.
Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac?
Yeah.
One of those?
That there was, they were supposed to look at not the percentage of the entire loan, but they were supposed to look at what the repayment was, what they were.
Like the monthly amount or something?
Yes. And so instead of looking at the monthly amount, they were looking at the percentage of the entire loan, and that's why they were denied. So is there any recourse, or is there any law that lenders should be looking at? And I don't know if I'm asking this question properly.
You're doing pretty well. There's about 3 answers, and some of which I'll just give to you. I'll give now, and if you want to talk about it some more, that's fine. So lenders do use ratios of income to debt, debt to income ratios in making decisions about what amount of loans you can afford. And they have criteria that are often set by the entity that's going to buy the loan. Fannie Mae buys loans from banks, and then that frees up the money for the banks to go make more loans. Freddie Mac buys loans, but for them to buy loans, you have to meet the criteria. So it sounds like the lender made a mistake in their calculations. They did not follow the criteria that either Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac were offering. However, if that is the case, they should apply for another loan.
Well, they did, and they got it.
So that's always the best evidence that there might have been something weird about and hinky about the first one, is to go get another loan from another lender. The question is, could it be discrimination? Could it be, sexual orientation kind of discrimination? HUD adopted an equal access rule that prohibits discrimination in various transactions based on sexual orientation or gender identity, but it is not part of the Fair Housing Act. And it, unfortunately, does not apply. It applies to FHA loans, but not to all loans. So I would say there's not an easy cause of action about this. I mean, they should have been given the reason for denial. They should have had an opportunity to go back to the lender and try to change it, but probably by the time that happened, they were on to the next loan. So there's not an easy answer to this. Could have been an honest mistake, could have been sexual orientation. Hard to tell without some further conversation. Steve, I don't know if you have anything to add to this. Steve is the guru on lending stuff around the country, sitting behind you. But
my question is the mistake idea.
yeah.
Because what you really look for, what is the intent? Is the intent of the lender to approve the loan or turn it down?
Yeah.
If there's mistakes made, mistakes should go the other way. It should be going in a way that would favor the borrower to get the loan closed so the bank can make some money. If it goes the other way, then it raises a red flag.
Yeah, but is it illegal to discriminate based on sexual orientation in a loan? I would argue, by the way, that the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, which probably applies to this loan, covers sex discrimination. And there has been talk that one might argue that sex discrimination in that law could be interpreted broadly enough to include discrimination against a same-sex couple. Yes?
Or to be gender stereotyping, you could
Yeah.
do the Price Waterhouse.
Yep.
But on that situation, file the complaint with HUD or Michigan Department of Civil Rights or whatever state or local agency, and then you have to do that right away.
Philadelphia.
And then Philadelphia, and then they will investigate, they will come up with other loan files, and they can analyze it to see what kind of debt ratios were used for other similarly situated borrowers. And from that standpoint, you get a pretty good comparison. Once you do that, if they've been approving people with similar debt ratios, higher debt ratios, they've gotten approved, then you already have comparable files. You have enough to get a verdict at that point.
I think before you ever get there, they potentially have the opportunity to get perfectly acceptable settlement from the lender, who will be scared shitless, excuse my language, when they get a sexual orientation complaint against them. Steve or I can talk to you more about that afterwards. Any more questions? Because I know you guys have other things to go do. Oh, you got a couple of more over here.
Only take a few more.
Okay.
Hi there, thanks for your speech today, it was wonderful.
Thank you.
From the CDBG table over here, we're obviously very concerned about everything that's happening at the federal level. The White House budget is certainly very concerning. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on specific things that we can do at the municipal level, county level, city level to help protect our communities. Two specific things, I was in a talk yesterday and got to hear Matthew Desmond speak.
Oh, yeah. Matt Desmond. All right.
Yeah, so he was talking about a new law New York City passed a couple weeks ago about right to counsel at the city level, which is really interesting, and I wondered if you knew anything more about that. And I've also heard cities taking up the affirmatively furthering fair housing sort of perspective at the city level in case HUD moves to dismantle those efforts. So I wanted to hear your thoughts.
So first part first, the right to counsel is a growing movement. I similarly went and heard someone speak about this. An old friend of mine from the fair housing world, a guy named John Pollock, who used to work for a fair housing group in Alabama, is now leading that, is one of the leaders of that movement out of Baltimore. The idea is you would have right to counsel in various landlord-tenant and other similar transactions to make sure that the law is being fairly enforced or followed, and it potentially could be a funding source for various legal services and fair housing groups. It is not a national movement yet. It is just starting, and New York City with a progressive mayor is not the same as some other communities or states, but it's worth thinking about. On the issue about the affirmatively furthering fair housing, my advice to any community who cares about the work is to keep doing it. The consultants that HUD has hired to help communities are still there. They still have a contract that lasts 2 more years, just got recently renewed. So that's Enterprise and Apt Associates. So they're doing all kinds of help. It's the right thing to do. I mean, my husband, who's been dead many, many years now, but was had a master's degree in urban planning, was a city planner when he died. And so we went to school together, law school, and he was getting his master's. And we learned from each other, and we learned, first of all, make no small plans, but we also learned how to pay attention to a planning process that is thoughtful and rigorous and that included fair housing perspectives. And the AFFH process does require that. There's a lot of data. I just got through going through HUD's data and mapping tool. I'm writing a piece about it, how to use it for advocates right now. And there's a lot of data on HUD's website, AFFHT, where you can go and you can pull down the state of Michigan, you pull down whatever city you want to, and you start looking at patterns of segregation and limited English population and housing burden, cost burden, all kinds of data sets. And while it's not perhaps as refined as some other data sets, it's consistent across the country. There is a move to incorporate the AFFH process into state and local legislation. I recommend it as a precaution for a community that's very serious about it. The state of California is introducing a bill soon to do this for the entire state of California and has announced its intent. The guy who's head of housing and community development for the state of California used to work at HUD, and I know him, and he's committed publicly to the continuation of the AFFH, affirmatively furthering fair housing, rebuild communities that are not segregated and that are diverse and cherish all the values of everyone who contributes to the community kind of thing. I know that's a broad overstatement, but how do you explain AFFH in like 2 seconds? Look at the data, which shows certain things. If I were a local community, I'm working with Pittsburgh right now. I'm working with other communities to preserve and to plan around their assessment, not writing the assessment, but how to get ready for doing the assessment. And there's consultants who will help. Keep doing that, get your assessment and make it good, right? And then look to preserve that approach. Once you have a good assessment, if you can wait that long with your electeds, You know, wait until you have a great assessment, everybody's going, yeah, this is what this community really needs, and then ask them to take that and institutionalize the process regardless of whether or not HUD requires it. That's my advice. I want to see what happens in California with their bill. I've read the bill. The bill's not ready for prime time. It's still, I mean, it's just being introduced. And so the concept is there, but the reality is not quite there. So that's my advice. Happy to talk about it. Anything else? Are we done? Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm a realtor, and this is the best con ed I've had all year.
Oh, good.
So apropos to Janet's question and Steve's comment, just yesterday in a sales meeting, a local lender, just kind of a news item that Freddie Mac had apparently clarified or announced, or somehow it was a news item, that specific issue regarding student loans, looking at the payment options, not the amount. Look at the credit as evidence of credit. Look at how they're paying. And the comment was, we're not sure about Fannie Mae yet, but Freddie Mac.
If Freddie Mac does it, Fannie will not be far behind, as you know.
So here's my question.
Yep.
The question is I encounter a situation where I think there is some pushback on a lender on a fair housing item. And myself or my sales manager make contact with the loan officer and raise it, and nothing happens, there's further pushback. What's the next best step in engagement?
Pam. Okay, because Pam will call me, right? And we'll think of a strategy. Often the next step is get the latest fair housing take on it, and write a letter to not to the loan officer, but up the chain to a district manager or someone like that, to outline the legal concepts and to say what you want to have happen next. Happy to be of assistance on any of those. You know, knowing about it, it's like a tip. It's like you're like given a tip about a potential problem that also could injure you. You could lose a commission, for example, if that loan doesn't go through. So getting people,
held responsible by your
which we don't want happen at all, right? So getting the help early so that you get your hand held through the process helps clarify your motives, and also making sure that your rights are protected as well as your buyers.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody.